A forgotten capital once measured its days not by the sun, but by the beat of a ceremonial drum. This is the story of a city that redefined time, weaving its very calendar from the fabric of civic rituals. You will uncover a lost chapter of human history that reveals how our relationship with time is a choice, not a certainty. How did a society manage to build its days around public ceremony, and what caused its unique clock to finally stop ticking? What does your own daily routine say about what you value most? The first sound to pierce the morning silence was not a bell, but the deep, resonant thrum of a great ceremonial drum. Its beat did not mark a specific hour of the sun's journey. Instead, it announced the commencement of the weaving ritual, the act that officially began the city's day. In this forgotten capital, a day was not a fixed block of time dictated by the heavens. It was a fluid, living entity defined entirely by the completion of its most vital civic ceremonies. The entire social rhythm was built around this radical idea. The primary unit of time was not an hour or a minute, but the successful conclusion of a communal action. From the moment the drum sounded, the city's populace engaged in a coordinated, public act of creating textiles for communal use. Only when the final thread was tied and the cloth was presented did that segment of time, that morning, conclude. The cycle would then reset, beginning anew with the next drumbeat signaling the distribution ritual. This was not about fitting events into a pre-existing schedule. The rituals were the schedule. Their performance literally built the architecture of the day, brick by symbolic brick. This represented a fundamental break from every other known civilization, which looked to the stars, the sun, and the moon to impose order upon their lives. Here, time was not observed in the sky. It was manufactured on the ground through human intention and collective effort. It was a breathtaking social experiment that placed human activity, not celestial mechanics, at the very center of temporal reality. How could such a system possibly function without descending into utter chaos? The answer lies in the intricate, almost invisible, social machinery that held everything together. The key to understanding this city did not arrive with a single dramatic find, but through a slow, bewildering puzzle. It began with stone tablets, unearthed in a secluded valley far from any known trade routes. These were not simple markers. They were intricately carved with a complex sequence of glyphs, and at first, archaeologists believed they had discovered a new form of astronomical calendar. The initial excitement, however, quickly turned to profound confusion. The symbols did not chart the predictable movements of the moon or sun. There were no constellations, no solstice markers. Instead, the carvings depicted human activities. One glyph showed a line of figures holding what appeared to be looms. Another illustrated a crowd gathered around a central figure distributing goods from large urns. A third showed a solemn public gathering in a vast circular plaza. The scholars were stumped. How could a series of public ceremonies function as a calendar? The answer slowly dawned as more artifacts were recovered. This was not a city that measured time. It was a city that performed it. We have come to call this place the City of Cycles, for its name is lost to history, but its revolutionary concept of time is not. The city's very design was a physical map of its strange new clock. At its heart lay a massive ceremonial plaza, perfectly circular. From this central point, wide avenues radiated outward like spokes on a wheel, each one leading to a different district dedicated to a specific civic function. The weaving district, the distribution quarter, the hall of announcements, the entire urban landscape was a concrete manifestation of an abstract idea. A citizen did not walk to the plaza at a specific hour. The commencement of a ritual signaled by that ceremonial drum meant that the entire city was, for that period, functionally in the plaza, metaphorically speaking. Their collective action in their own districts was what propelled the city from one temporal segment to the next. The stone tablets were not a calendar in our sense. They were a script, and each day the city performed that script, building its own reality one ritual at a time. The air in the central plaza grew thick with the scent of crushed juniper and sun-baked clay, a fragrance that signaled the city's true heartbeat was about to begin. This was the ritual of the unified voice, the anchor that held the entire temporal system in place. As the sun reached its zenith, elders emerged from the Hall of Announcements, their faces hidden behind polished masks of black obsidian, each one carved to represent a different civic virtue. The entire adult population, having concluded their morning's labor, would stream into the plaza, their movements not rushed but deliberate, a river of humanity finding its basin. The ceremony did not start with a speech. It began with a single, sustained note from a horn made from a giant ram's curl, a sound that seemed to vibrate from the very stones underfoot. Then the chanting started. It was not a song with words, but a deep, resonant hum, a single syllable repeated by thousands of throats in perfect unison. This collective vibration was the city's way of taking its own pulse, a sonic affirmation of their shared purpose. For hours, this hum would continue, rising and falling in intensity as the elders performed symbolic acts at the plaza's center, mingling soils from each district, anointing a central pillar with water from the public aqueducts. The ritual's conclusion was its most critical moment. As the light began to fade, the High Elder would approach a massive bronze brazier where a sacred flame, kindled at the city's founding, had burned perpetually. With a great pair of tongs, they would lift the flame from its vessel and submerge it in a trough of white sand brought from the distant river delta. The second the hiss of the extinguished flame echoed across the now silent plaza, that specific ritual day was officially over. That single, deliberate act was the true tick of the city's clock. The hiss was not an end, but a release. It initiated a period of quiet preparation, a societal inhale before the next drumbeat would signal a new exhalation of activity. The entire population understood that their collective day was defined not by the sun's journey, but by this shared performance and its definitive conclusion. How did such an intricate system of timekeeping affect the individual mind? What did it feel like to live inside a human-made clock, where your own actions were the gears that moved its hands? The hiss of the extinguished flame did more than end a day. It passed an immense responsibility to a small, highly trained class of individuals. These were the Council of Timekeepers, the civic shamans who held the city's hourglass. They were neither kings nor priests in the traditional sense. Their authority was not derived from lineage or a claim to divine favor, but from a flawless mastery of procedure. They were living metronomes, their very beings dedicated to the precise orchestration of the city's rhythm. Their training began in childhood, a grueling mental and physical regimen designed to burn the ritual sequences into muscle memory and mind. They learned to gauge the sun's position not to tell time, but to know the exact moment to signal the drummers. They memorized the subtle shifts in the crowd's energy that indicated a ritual was reaching its natural culmination. A single misstep from a timekeeper, a drumbeat struck a breath too early or a chant initiated out of sequence, was not viewed as a simple mistake. It was a catastrophic event, a tear in the very fabric of the day. The city believed that such an error could create a period of temporal disarray, a lost fragment of time where the social order had no anchor. This belief granted the council an authority that was absolute. They could delay the distribution ritual if the weaving was not unanimously declared complete, or extend the unified voice if the collective hum was judged to lack sufficient harmony. This concentration of power was profoundly radical. In every other society, time was a force imposed by the gods or the cosmos, a law of nature that humans could only observe and obey. But here, in this forgotten capital, time was a civic project, and the timekeepers were its chief engineers. They had pulled the measurement of existence down from the heavens and placed it firmly in human hands. This raises a haunting question. In a society where time was so fragile, so dependent on human perfection, what happened when that perfection finally failed? What kind of event could shatter a clock made not of gears but of faith and ceremony? A citizen of this city never woke to the sun's first light, but to the resonant clang of the call to assembly gong. This sound was your true morning, the moment your personal existence snapped into alignment with the city's collective purpose. Your first act was not to eat or to stretch, but to gather your ritual tools. If you were a weaver, you checked your loom. If you were a farmer, you sharpened your scythe. This preparatory phase was not considered mere work. It was the first quiet movement in the day's great symphony. Your labor in the fields or at the craftsman's bench was never just about producing food or cloth. It was a necessary act that readied the materials for the grand civic ceremonies to come. The entire morning was a slow, purposeful crescendo building toward the ritual's peak. When the sun reached its highest point, a profound silence fell across the city. This was the time for the midday meal, but it was consumed not with chatter, but in a state of deep reflection. In every home and public square, people ate quietly, their minds turning inward, contemplating their role in the coming ceremony. It was a city-wide moment of focus, a collective inhale before the great exhalation of the ritual itself. Then, as the unified voice began its deep hum, the city froze. Commerce ceased entirely. The marketplace stood empty, the looms fell still, the fields were abandoned. For those hours, there were no individuals, only a single organism performing its most vital function. You could feel this shift in the very air. The absence of everyday noise made the ritual's chant feel all the more immense, a physical pressure that vibrated in your chest. Your personal needs, your hunger, your fatigue, all of it was secondary to the shared act of creating that day's segment of time. Only when the sacred flame was plunged into the sand with its definitive hiss did the spell break. The release was palpable. Shoulders would relax, breath was let out, and the city would slowly return to its individual parts. Commerce would resume, conversations would spark to life, but now with a sense of shared accomplishment. The day you had just lived was not a measurement, it was a creation, and you had helped build it. Your entire sense of past, present, and future was woven from these collective experiences. Can you imagine living in a world where your day was not sliced into hours, but composed of meaningful, shared actions? This was a reality where time was not a resource to be spent, but a story to be told together. The city's central plaza was not just a place for gathering, it was a colossal, horizontal sundial, but this was no simple time teller for the individual. Its central obelisk cast a shadow that fell across a complex mosaic of colored stones, and its reading was only meaningful when the entire populace stood in the ritual of the unified voice. The specific posture they held, arms raised and heads bowed, aligned their bodies with the plaza's geometry, making the citizens themselves the final, living markers on the dial's face. The length and direction of the shadow at that precise collective moment determined the progression to the next ritual. Even the city's water clocks, sophisticated devices that measured the flow of water from one vessel to another, were subservient to the civic rhythm. They were not reset at dawn. Instead, at the climax of the distribution ritual, just as the last measure of grain was given to a designated district, a timekeeper would ceremoniously tip the clock, emptying it completely. The flow of time literally began anew with the completion of a shared act of provision. This integration went deeper still. The main avenue leading from the weaving district to the plaza was flanked by a series of progressively taller stone monoliths. To a visitor, they might have seemed like mere decoration, but to a citizen, they were a personal timekeeper. As you walked this path after the morning drum, your own shadow would sequentially touch the base of each monolith. When your shadow finally reached the foot of the tallest pillar, you knew, without any clock to consult, that the communal weaving was nearing its end and the call to the plaza was imminent. You were not just walking through the city, you were moving through the articulated segments of the day. The environment itself guided your actions and reinforced the schedule. This architectural calendar made the system inescapable. There was no need to rebel against the clock, because the clock was the street you walked on, the building you lived in, the very shadow you cast. The stones themselves whispered the schedule, making deviation feel not just wrong, but physically unnatural. How does a society recover when the stones themselves fall silent? While other ancient cultures gazed upward in awe, charting the predictable dance of the moon and sun, the citizens of this city turned their focus inward. Archaeologists have found clear evidence that they possessed sophisticated astronomical knowledge. Precise alignments in their architecture and markings on a few sealed tablets prove they could predict solstices and even eclipses. Yet, these celestial events held no power over their daily lives. A solar eclipse was not recorded as a moment of divine portent or cosmic wonder. In the city's official chronicles, such an event was noted with a single, pragmatic line. It stated only that the eclipse had caused a delay in the commencement of the weaving ritual. The cosmos was not the master of their time. It was merely a potential disruption to their human-made schedule. This reveals a breathtaking philosophical stance. The city's founders made a conscious, radical choice. They decided that the most reliable and meaningful measure of time's passage was not the distant, impersonal movement of stars, but the immediate, tangible rhythm of their own society. They trusted the collective heartbeat of their ceremonies more than they trusted the sun. This stands in stark contrast to our modern world, where our time is dictated by hyper-accurate atomic clocks and digital calendars synchronized across the globe. Our time is data, precise and unforgiving. Their time was a story authored daily by the community. They subordinated the entire cosmos to the civic calendar, believing that human intention and shared action created a more relevant reality than any astronomical cycle ever could. What does it say about a people who looked at the sun and the moon and decided their own rituals were more important? This unique conception of time rewired the city's entire economy, turning commerce into another form of ceremony. You would not find a marketplace open from dawn to dusk. Instead, the flow of goods pulsed in strict ritual phases. The markets only stirred to life in the quiet period following the hiss of the extinguished flame, a time designated for individual trade and barter. This was not a long window. Commerce was a brief, frantic interlude between the grand civic acts, a necessary but secondary function that was permitted only after the day's primary time-making was complete. The value of an object was not just in its material worth, but in its timing. A bolt of cloth available for trade before the weaving ritual was concluded was considered illicit, almost taboo. That same cloth, offered in the market after the ritual's successful end, was not only acceptable but carried the implicit value of having been part of the day's creation. This system extended to the most formal of agreements. A contract for the sale of a house was not dated by a numbered year. It was inscribed as being agreed upon during the third gathering of the rain ritual or the passing of the fifth sun ceremony. Your legal and financial life was anchored not to an abstract calendar, but to the shared memory of a specific collective experience. This created a powerful, unbreakable link between economic activity and social cohesion. You could not be a successful merchant without being a fully participating citizen. Your productivity was not measured in coins alone, but in your reliable presence at the crucial moments that built the day. Tax collection was the ultimate expression of this fusion. The city's government did not demand tribute on a fixed monthly date. The annual granary opening ritual was the signal for tax collection to begin. As the communal stores were ceremoniously unlocked, citizens would bring their share of grain, cloth, or crafted goods, their contribution itself becoming part of the ritual's performance. Paying your taxes was not a bureaucratic duty. It was a civic act that reinforced the very system that gave time its meaning. The economy was not an independent force driven by supply and demand. It was a function of social ritual, its rhythm dictated by the drum and the chant, its health dependent on the willingness of every person to play their part in the collective performance. In this city, you did not make a living by watching the clock. You made a living by helping to build it. This radical synchronization of daily life wove a social fabric of incredible strength. Every single person in the city, from the master weaver to the youngest child carrying water, moved through the exact same sequence of events at the exact same moment. When the drum sounded for the weaving ritual, 10,000 hands reached for their threads. When the chant of the unified voice began, 10,000 throats produced the same hum. This shared temporal journey eliminated the very concept of being out of sync with your neighbor. There was no social friction born from one person's workday ending as another's began, no loneliness felt by someone awake while the rest of the city slept. Your personal timeline was a perfect miniature reflection of the city's own grand timeline. Your hunger pangs signaled the approach of the midday reflection. Your fatigue after a long ritual mirrored the city's collective exhaustion before the flame was extinguished. This created a profound, almost biological sense of mutual dependence. You knew with absolute certainty that the ritual could not conclude without you, just as you knew you could not have a meal without the farmer who grew the grain during the designated agricultural phase. Your individual contribution was a visible, acknowledged stitch in the daily tapestry. This system fostered a collective identity so powerful it is difficult for us to comprehend. In our world, we share a calendar, but we rarely share an experience of time. One person works a night shift, another is in a meeting, a third is commuting. Our days are fragmented, but in the city of cycles, the day was a single, unified event experienced by all. A citizen's sense of self was deeply interwoven with the civic whole. You were not an individual who happened to live in a city. You were a living, breathing component of the city itself, your actions essential to its very existence. Your purpose was built into the schedule of the world around you. What kind of security, what deep-seated peace must that have provided? Yet this very strength contained a hidden fragility. A society bound so tightly together by shared ritual would have no defense, no resilience, if that ritual were ever broken. This radical focus on the present moment created a profound challenge for the future. How does a civilization write its own history when its fundamental units of time are as perishable as a dying echo or a hiss of steam? They could not simply mark years by the reigns of kings, for their leaders were timekeepers, not dynastic rulers. They could not date events by the predictable turn of seasons, for they had consciously subordinated the cosmos to their civic calendar. Their solution was as unique as their concept of time itself. The city's historians did not chronicle wars or the births of monarchs. They meticulously documented the performance of their rituals. A typical entry in their annals might read something like this. In the season following the Great Landslide, the weaving ritual was concluded for 23 consecutive days without a single flawed thread. Or, during the prolonged fever, the unified voice was muted, and the flame was extinguished prematurely for 9 cycles. Their history was not a timeline of singular events, but a deep record of rhythmic consistency and its interruptions. A major flood was not remembered for the destruction it caused, but for how it forced the ritual of distribution to be held on the high ground of the processional way for an entire moon. A period of great prosperity was recorded as the era when the midday chant achieved perfect harmonic resonance for a record number of performances. The past was measured in ceremonial quality. This creates a fascinating puzzle for modern archaeologists. Finding a tablet that speaks of a great drought tells you little. Finding one that states the drought caused the granary opening to be delayed by 3 full ritual cycles tells you everything. You can cross-reference that disruption with other records, building a relative chronology where events are pegged to their impact on the city's sacred schedule. It is a history written not in years, but in ripples across the surface of their communal life. The city's entire past was a grand narrative of their ritual integrity, a story where the true protagonist was not a person, but the unbroken rhythm of their shared days. What happens to that story, then, when the rhythm itself begins to falter? The first crack in the city's perfect clock was not a loud shatter, but a slow, silent drought. For 3 full ritual cycles, the winter rains did not come. The river that fed the aqueduct shrank to a muddy trickle. This was more than an agricultural disaster. It was a direct assault on the city's temporal foundation. The ritual of the unified voice required a specific amount of pure water from the public aqueducts to anoint the central pillar. As the reservoirs dwindled, the timekeepers were forced to reduce the amount of water used in the ceremony. Each day, the libation grew smaller, a visible, heartbreaking diminishment of a sacred act. The collective anxiety was a physical presence in the plaza, thicker than the incense. The hum of the unified voice began to falter, its resonance choked by the dry air and drier spirits. The perfect, self-referential loop of their days was being broken by a world they had tried so hard to ignore. Then came the day the High Elder approached the brazier with an almost empty vessel. The single drop of water that fell onto the pillar sizzled and vanished instantly on the hot bronze. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The ritual felt hollow, incomplete. For the first time in living memory, the ceremony's conclusion did not bring a sense of release, but a gnawing dread. The system was proving brittle. It could not bend to accommodate a changing world. It could only strictly perform, and when a key component was missing, the performance itself felt like a lie. This environmental pressure was compounded by a new external force. Envoys from a vast, sun-worshipping empire arrived at the city's gates. They came with gifts and offers of trade, but they operated on a rigid solar calendar. They demanded to know the specific date by their own reckoning for a return visit. The Council of Timekeepers could only offer a bewildering answer. They promised the meeting would occur during the passage of the second weaving after the next granary opening. The envoys left frustrated, viewing the city not as a sophisticated society, but as a place of baffling primitives who could not tell time. Practical conflicts multiplied. A merchant from the Sun Empire wanted to sell his wares, but the city's market was closed for the midday reflection. He grew impatient, then angry, his linear time clashing violently with the city's cyclical rhythm. Whispers began among the people, especially the young. A faction started to question the immense mental energy required to maintain the ritual time. They saw the Sun Empire's envoys with their clear dates and predictable schedules, and they wondered if their ancestors had chosen a path of unnecessary complexity. Why should the entire city grind to a halt for hours just to hum in unison? The very meaning of their existence, once so clear in the shared performance, was now clouded with doubt. The perfect loop was fractured, and through those cracks, a terrifying new question entered the city's consciousness. What if their entire reality, the only one they had ever known, was built upon a beautiful but ultimately fragile idea? The foreign envoy tapped his finger on a sun-etched bronze tablet, his impatience a stark contrast to the city's ceremonial calm. He needed a date, a solid, predictable point in the future for his fleet's return. The Council of Timekeepers offered him a phrase that was, to them, perfectly precise. "We will greet you after the second completion right following the granary opening." To the envoy, this was nonsense. His civilization measured time by the unyielding march of the sun and the moon. A day was a fixed cycle of light and dark. A month was the moon's journey from sliver to full circle. Their calendar was a map of the heavens, independent of human action. For them, the statement after the granary opening was infuriatingly vague. What if the granary opened late? What if the ritual was delayed by rain or by a flawed thread? Their time was absolute. The city's time was conditional. This was more than a simple misunderstanding over scheduling. It was a collision between two fundamentally different ways of building a world. One saw reality as a celestial mechanism, ticking forward with or without human consent. The other saw reality as a communal performance, created anew each day by shared intention. The envoy's insistence on a solar date was in effect a demand that the city abandon its own reality and submit to an external, impersonal clock. The pressure to conform began to create fissures within the city's own social order. A new generation of merchants, eager for the wealth the Sun Empire offered, started to grumble. Why should they lose a lucrative trade deal because the entire city was locked in an hours-long chant? They began to see their own rituals not as the sacred architecture of time, but as a cumbersome obstacle to progress. The very meaning of their existence was being challenged. The perfect, self-contained loop of their days was being pried open by a world that operated on a completely different frequency. The stones of their city still whispered the old schedule, but now some citizens were starting to listen to a new, more demanding rhythm, one measured in solar days and lunar months, a rhythm that asked for no ceremony and offered no shared purpose, only the cold, hard certainty of a ticking clock. How do you hold onto a reality when a more powerful one is knocking at your gates? The city's great drum fell silent, but its rhythm may have survived in the words people continued to speak. Long after the plaza cracked and the ceremonial flame was forgotten, the region's languages held curious, fossilized phrases that baffled outsiders. People would speak of waiting for the drum to sound when they meant exercising patience for the perfect moment to act. They used the expression between the rites to describe a troubling period of uncertainty or transition, a time when the proper course of action was not yet clear. To them, these were just common sayings, their original context lost to the ages, but to a modern linguist, they are startling echoes of a lost reality. These phrases are the ghostly impressions of a civilization that structured its entire existence around civic performance. The drumbeat was not a musical note, it was the official start of a new temporal segment. The time between rites was not merely a pause, it was a liminal, almost dangerous gap in the formally constructed day. Other linguistic clues point to this origin. A regional term for a sudden, collective effort translates literally as a weaving, hearkening back to that foundational morning ritual. The most profound compliment you could pay someone was to call them in harmony, a direct linguistic descendant of the city's most vital ceremony. These are not just poetic metaphors, They are the skeletal remains of a complete temporal worldview, preserved in the amber of everyday speech. They reveal how deeply the city's unique experience of time was woven into the very consciousness of its people. The stones of their capital may have crumbled, but the architecture of their thoughts, embedded in language, endured for generations. It makes you wonder what common phrases we use today might be the forgotten echoes of a reality we can no longer remember. The city measured its seconds in the rhythm of a shared breath, while hours are defined by the silent, hyper-stable oscillations of a cesium atom in a vacuum. Their fundamental unit of time was the duration of a single, resonant chant during the unified voice ceremony, a moment that could stretch or contract with the collective emotion of the crowd. Ours is coordinated universal time, an unyielding standard of 9,192,631,770 periods of radiation emitted by a cesium-133 atom. This is the starkest possible contrast in humanity's relationship with time. Theirs was qualitative, woven from experience and feeling. Ours is purely quantitative, an abstract number ruling our lives from distant atomic clocks. The city's time was local, emerging from the community and dying with the hiss of the sacred flame each evening, only to be reborn with the next drum. Our time is global, enforced identically in every time zone, a universal grid that syncs financial markets and flight schedules with cold, impersonal precision. We have achieved a miracle of synchronization, yet we have lost the very thing that gave the city's days their soul. Their clock was built from meaning. Our clocks are built from data. This forces a difficult question. In our relentless pursuit of perfect, universal measurement, have we stripped time of its story? Have we gained the entire world only to lose our place in its rhythm? To live inside that human clock was to inhabit a mind utterly foreign to our own. Without the constant external pressure of a sun-driven schedule, a citizen's sense of time became an internal rhythm, a pulse perfectly synchronized to the drum and the chant. You did not need to look at a sundial to know the weaving ritual was ending. You could feel it in the collective shift of energy around you. A subtle signal passed from person to person like a neural current. This endogenous time, generated from within the society itself, likely fostered a profound state of collective consciousness, individual anxiety about wasting time that gnawing modern fear would have been nonsensical. How could you waste a resource you were actively creating with your community? Time was not a finite commodity to be spent and lost, but a shared, regenerative cycle. Your very participation was what replenished it. The panic of a looming deadline, the stress of racing against a clock you cannot control, these modern plagues would have found no foothold here. Your only deadline was the collective perfection of the ritual itself. This did not mean life was without pressure. The weight was simply different. It was a deep, profound social pressure to perform your role flawlessly, to ensure your thread was straight and your chant was true, because the entire city's temporal reality depended on it. A mistake did not just make you late for a meeting, it risked creating a moment of existential dissonance for everyone. This forged a psyche where your greatest personal fear was not inefficiency, but inadequacy. Your self-worth was inextricably linked to your reliable contribution to the whole. Can you imagine the mental quietude of never feeling you were running behind, coupled with the immense responsibility of knowing the entire day would not move forward without you? This was the psychological landscape of the city, a world where time was not a master to be obeyed, but a chorus in which every voice had to be heard. The city's radical clock was not born from practicality, but from a sacred story. Their foundational myth spoke of a primordial era they called the Muddled Age, a time before rituals when existence was a formless, terrifying chaos. In this age, there were no days or nights, only a grey, endless swirl where hunger, sleep, and labor collided without rhythm or reason. People lived in a state of perpetual confusion, unable to coordinate, to build, or to trust one another. The sun and moon still crossed the sky, but they were just distant, silent lights in a world without meaning. The gods, witnessing this suffering, did not give the people a king or a set of laws. Instead, they gifted them the first ceremonial drum and the sacred, perpetual flame. The myth tells that the first beat of that drum did not just make a sound, it carved the very first segment of ordered time from the formless void. That first act of collective weaving did not just produce cloth, it wove the first thread of social order. The rituals were not invented by humans, they were divine tools for structuring reality itself. This origin story made their calendar infinitely more than a civic tool. It was a sacred duty, a daily reenactment of the moment the cosmos was tamed. To abandon the rituals was not to adopt a new schedule, it was to risk plunging the world back into the chaos of the muddled age. This spiritual justification is why the system endured for so long, its logic woven into the very soul of the culture. The fear of temporal chaos was far more powerful than any desire for mere convenience. How do you argue with a sun clock when your entire existence is a bulwark against primordial disorder? Every song sung in the city's plaza was a clock with a melody. The arts were not a separate part of life, a diversion for leisure. They were the essential gears and springs of the city's temporal machine. Music possessed a strict functional precision. The opening chant of the unified voice was not a free-form expression. It was a composition of exactly 1,800 deep, resonant hums, a number that corresponded to the adult population at the city's legendary founding. Its duration was the official length of that ritual phase. To sing it faster was to rush the day, to drag it out was to stall time itself. The musicians who played the ram's horn and the great drum were not performers, they were technicians of time, their every note a calibrated signal that moved the entire society from one state to the next. This functional artistry extended to the objects of daily life. The intricate patterns adorning their pottery were far more than decoration. A single water jar might display a spiral of interconnected symbols, a weaver's shuttle, a sheaf of grain, a water droplet, and finally, a flame being extinguished. To our eyes, it is a beautiful design. To a citizen, it was a visual checklist, a mnemonic device that reinforced the proper sequence of the day's primary rituals. A child learning this pattern was not learning art, they were learning the very architecture of their reality. The murals on public buildings depicted not scenes of battle or mythology, but stylized, step-by-step illustrations of the civic ceremonies themselves. Art was a living, breathing instruction manual for the city's clock. The most profound fusion was in dance. During the granary opening ritual, the movements of the participants were a carefully choreographed performance that physically acted out the passage of an entire agricultural cycle. A slow, upward reach of the arms represented the planting of seeds. A series of turning, swaying steps mirrored the growth of crops under the sun. A final, swift gathering motion symbolized the harvest. To dance was to compress time into a symbolic, physical narrative. You were not just celebrating the harvest, you were embodying the months of labor that led to it, making the abstract passage of seasons tangible through your own body. In this world, aesthetic beauty and temporal structure were completely inseparable. A perfectly fired pot with a clear, legible pattern was not just a well-made object, it was a virtuous one because it helped uphold the social order. A harmonious chant was not just pleasant to hear, it was functionally correct, keeping the day on its proper track. There was no distinction between what was useful and what was beautiful. the beautiful was useful because it encoded the rhythm of life itself. This integration meant that meaning was not reserved for special occasions. It was embedded in the pattern of a bowl, the melody of a work song, the rhythm of a daily walk. The city did not just tell time, it sang it, painted it, and danced it into being every single day. How different is our own experience, where art and efficiency so often exist in separate, warring kingdoms. Yet beneath the hum of perfect synchronization, another, much older clock continued to tick. It was the quiet grumble of a child's stomach mid-morning, a need that paid no attention to the progress of the weaving ritual. It was the farmer who felt an ache in his bones and knew, with a certainty that preceded any drumbeat, that a rainstorm was approaching. This was the shadow calendar, an unofficial, deeply personal understanding of time that ran in silent parallel to the grand civic performance. It was not tracked on stone tablets or signaled by a horn, but was felt in the body and observed in the natural world. For all its beauty, the official schedule could not silence the internal rhythm of a heartbeat or the ancient knowledge of migrating birds. Some citizens, especially those whose work kept them close to the land, began to secretly keep this other time. An anonymous artifact, a small, smoothed river stone found in the ruins of a farmhouse on the city's edge, tells a tantalizing story. On one side, it is unremarkable. On the other, it bears a series of faint, carefully etched lines. To an untrained eye, they are nothing. But to an archaeologist, they are a crude but functional lunar calendar, tracking the phases of the moon over several months. This was a dangerous act of quiet resistance. For a farmer to track the moon was to acknowledge a power greater than the council of timekeepers, a rhythm more fundamental than the unified voice. This secret knowledge was a form of insurance. It allowed a family to plant a hidden garden according to the rains, not the rituals, ensuring they would not go hungry if a ceremony was delayed. It was in these small, defiant acts that the seeds of a new temporal understanding were sown. While the city chanted to create its day, a handful of its people were quietly remembering how to listen to the world, preserving a connection to a reality that would long outlast the final, fading drumbeat. The breaking point arrived not with a roar, but with a single, silent heart. During the high summer of a year the city would later call the season of the stilled drum, the lead timekeeper, an elder named Ilara, collapsed at the very apex of the unified voice. The deep, resonant hum faltered as her body fell against the central pillar. According to fragmented records, the sacred flame was never extinguished. The ceremony simply stopped, frozen in a moment of collective shock and horror. The plaza did not empty. The people stood transfixed, waiting for a conclusion that did not come. The sun set and darkness fell, yet the day, by all official measure, had not ended. A profound and terrifying disorientation gripped the city. This was the chaos their myths had warned against, a temporal void with no ritual to fill it. Without the hiss of the flame, there was no signal to begin the evening's commerce, no permission to rest. People wandered the streets, their personal rhythms utterly shattered. The social panic was not about the death of a leader, but the death of a day. How do you sleep when the day itself refuses to end? The Council of Timekeepers, bereft of their chief, huddled in emergency session. Their first, desperate attempt was to perform an abridged version of the flame-extinguishing rite, but the people's faith had ruptured. They knew it was not the true ceremony, and the act felt hollow, a lie that only deepened the collective anxiety. This crisis forced the first crack in their perfect, inflexible system. They invented on the spot the ritual of the unfinished note. It was a contingency, a loophole for a broken reality. They gathered the people once more and declared that Ilara's final breath had in fact been the true conclusion of the ceremony, a silent, personal extinguishing of the flame. It was a fiction, but a necessary one. They carved a new rule into their stone tablets, a clause for catastrophic failure. It stated that if a primary ritual could not be physically completed, its symbolic intent, affirmed by the council, would be considered sufficient to close the temporal segment. This was the first admission that their human-made clock was fallible. The perfect loop was broken, and in its place was a patch, a desperate agreement to pretend, to paper over a crack in reality itself. The incident revealed a terrifying truth they had never before acknowledged. Their entire world was not built on stone and ritual, but on a fragile, continuous act of collective belief. A new survey of the ruins has finally cracked the code of the city's stone geometry. The city's main ceremonial axis, the grand avenue leading from the Hall of Announcements to the central plaza, is aligned with breathtaking precision to the spot on the horizon where the sun rises on the winter solstice. For most of the year, this alignment was architecturally invisible, a hidden potential locked in stone. But on that one shortest day, when the first sliver of the sun broke the horizon, a blade of light would shoot down the entire length of the avenue, striking the base of the central obelisk at the exact moment the High Elder began the opening chant of a special, once-a-year ceremony known as the Rekindling. This was not a calendar marking the solstice. It was a cosmic spotlight timed by the universe itself to illuminate the city's most important ritual. The sun was not their master. It was their stagehand. The entire celestial event was orchestrated to serve as a grand, annual special effect, a moment of divine stagecraft that validated their human-centered system. It proved they possessed deep astronomical knowledge, but they wielded that knowledge as a tool to amplify their own civic power, to make their rituals feel even more momentous and awe-inspiring. They used the cosmos not to tell them what to do, but to make what they were already doing feel utterly magnificent. This reveals a relationship with the universe far more complex than simple rejection. They were not ignorant of the stars, they were masters of theatrical timing, folding the grandeur of the cosmos into the narrative of their own man-made days. What other secret alignments might lie dormant in the stones, waiting only for the right ceremony to bring them to life? Scholars today are not just debating the city's philosophy, they are hunting for its true name. This is not an academic exercise, it is a high-tech archaeological race to pull a ghost from the fog of history. The place we call the City of Cycles is a placeholder, a label of convenience that underscores our fundamental ignorance. To learn its real name would be to finally hear its own voice, to reclaim it from theoretical model, and plant its flag firmly on the map of human history. The search is a multi-front campaign waging across deserts, jungles, and computer servers. Satellite imagery scans vast, inaccessible regions for the telltale geometric signature of a circular plaza with radiating avenues, a pattern unique to this civilization. In dense rainforests where the ground is invisible from above, LiDAR technology fires millions of laser pulses through the canopy, digitally stripping away the vegetation to reveal the ghostly footprints of ancient foundations and roadways hidden below. Every potential site is a pulse of excitement, a candidate for the lost capital. Meanwhile, linguists are performing a different kind of excavation, digging deep into the vocabularies of modern cultures that still inhabit the broader region. They are searching for phonological fossils, words for concepts like ritual drum or ceremonial flame that seem out of place, too complex or too specific for their current use. They analyze place names on old maps, listening for echoes of a forgotten name in the sound of a river or a mountain. The belief is that the city's true name did not vanish completely. It shattered, and its fragments were absorbed into the languages of the people who came after, like a faded melody woven into a newer song. Each of these technological threads represents a different way of listening for a lost signal. The satellites look for its physical shape, the LiDAR for its structural shadow, and the linguists for its whispered name. Unifying these clues is the ultimate goal. Finding a ruin that matches the city's unique layout is a monumental discovery, but matching that ruin to a name recovered from linguistic analysis would be a resurrection. It would transform this fascinating social experiment into a real place where real people lived, loved, and built their days from ceremony. The drive to name it is a profound human impulse. A name makes a thing knowable, solid, and real. It is the final step in pulling this forgotten capital back from the edge of oblivion, granting it the dignity of a specific identity and a permanent address in the story of our world. What will we learn about our own relationship with time when we can finally speak the name of the city that dared to redefine it? The relentless chime of a push notification now marks our days, a far cry from the city's unifying drumbeat. Our world of atomic precision and digital immediacy has given us more control over our schedules than any civilization in history, yet we are left feeling more harried and less present. The city's ultimate legacy is not a blueprint for a new calendar, but a profound question about the quality of our hours. They built a society where being mentally and physically present in a shared moment was the only way for time to advance at all. Their system compelled a depth of engagement that our fractured attention spans can barely comprehend. For them, mindfulness was not a wellness practice. It was the fundamental operating system of reality. We have optimized our world for efficiency and individual achievement, often at the direct expense of the communal bonds and shared experiences that gave the citizens of the cycles their profound sense of place and purpose. The constant pressure to be productive has squeezed out the space for simply being together. We cannot and should not try to abandon the global, standardized time that makes our modern world function. A surgeon must sync to a precise schedule, and a global supply chain depends on it. But we can learn to build our own rituals, carving out intentional pockets of qualitative time within the rigid grid of our quantitative lives. This is not about adding another item to your to-do list. It is about reclaiming the narrative of your day. A digital detox hour is a modern ritual, a deliberate extinguishing of the informational flame. A family meal without phones on the table is a small-scale unified voice, a shared act that creates a moment of synchronized connection. A weekly game night or a regular walk with a friend becomes a ceremonial drumbeat, structuring your week around relationship rather than task completion. These are not breaks from your schedule. They are the moments that give your schedule its meaning. They transform time from a resource you spend into an experience you build. The citizens of the forgotten capital knew a secret we have forgotten, that a life rich in time is not measured in minutes saved, but in moments fully shared. What small ritual could you begin this week to reclaim a piece of your own temporal story? The seamless harmony of the city of cycles came with a hidden, and perhaps terrible, price. This was a society where your personal timeline was a perfect echo of the city's own, a synchronization that created profound unity but left no room for the individual to march out of step. Could a person simply choose to sleep through the weaving ritual? Could a family decide their day would begin with a quiet breakfast rather than the call of the drum? The answer was a resounding no, and the consequences were severe. To consciously opt out was not seen as a personal choice or a simple act of laziness. It was a temporal crime, a direct assault on the shared reality everyone else was working so hard to build. Your absence from the unified voice was not just a missing voice in the chant, it was a crack in the foundation of the day itself. Your refusal to participate was an act of existential vandalism, This framing granted the Council of Timekeepers a power that was both immense and insidious. They were not just coordinating schedules, they were the arbiters of reality, and any deviation from the script could be labeled as a descent into the primordial chaos of their founding myths. The system's very beauty was its totalitarian nature. It offered a perfect, meaningful rhythm, but it demanded your entire being in return. There was no concept of a day off, no weekend, no personal vacation from the relentless performance of time. Your life was the ritual, and the ritual was life. This forces us to confront a difficult philosophical balance. The city achieved a level of social cohesion and collective purpose that modern societies can only dream of, but it did so by effectively erasing individual temporal autonomy. Your freedom to waste time, to be inefficient, to be out of sync, to be gloriously and messily human on your own schedule, was sacrificed for the good of the whole. The pressure to conform was not just social, it was woven into the very definition of existence. We grapple with echoes of this same tension today, though our chains are more subtle. The constant pressure to be productive, to optimize every waking moment, to never let a second go to waste, creates its own form of imposed temporality. Our corporate cultures and societal expectations often frame rest, leisure, or simply doing nothing as a kind of modern temporal crime, a failure to be efficient. The question the City of Cycles leaves us with is not which system is better, but where we choose to draw the line. How much of our personal freedom over our own time are we willing to surrender for a sense of order and belonging? Is the ultimate freedom the right to build a shared reality with others, or the right to step away from it entirely and watch the world turn without you? This radical experiment in social time was not a complete historical singularity. The City of Cycles represents the most extreme and pure expression of a universal human inclination to mold the abstract river of time into channels that reflect our deepest social and spiritual priorities. Look at the liturgical calendar of medieval Europe, for instance. For the common person, a year was not a sequence of months, but a recurring cycle of holy days, feast days, and fasts. Time was not a neutral grid of numbered days, but a sacred narrative, a perpetual reenactment of the life of Christ and the saints. You did not live in the month of March, you lived in the season of Lent, a period defined by penitence and reflection. The very rhythm of life, from the food you ate to the work you were permitted to do, was dictated by this religious framework. Similarly, in parts of Mesoamerica, complex market week cycles pulsed through society. A culture might operate on a repeating cycle of, say, 5 named days, where each day was associated with a specific deity, a specific type of good, and a specific market location. Your economic life and your spiritual life were synchronized to this rotating calendar. You did not simply go to the market, you went to the Jaguar Day Market to trade for obsidian, or to the Rain Day Market to acquire maize. The flow of commerce and community was structured by this sacred, repeating pulse. These systems, while less all-encompassing than the City of Cycles, share its core principle. They demonstrate a profound human desire to make time meaningful by tying it directly to the rituals, beliefs, and economic practices that define a community. The Forgotten Capital did not invent this idea. It simply took it to its absolute, logical conclusion, building a world where the civic ritual was not just marked by time, but was time itself. It stands as the ultimate testament on a spectrum of human experimentation, a bold reminder that the clocks we live by are always, ultimately, a reflection of what we value most. The great plaza lies silent now, a field of stone sleeping under the sun. The drum is dust, the sacred flame long cold, yet the city's final lesson echoes louder than any chant. This forgotten capital did not just tell time differently, It proved that every clock and calendar is a cultural manifesto, a set of values carved into the face of a day. Our own world, governed by the precise, impersonal tick of atomic clocks and digital alerts, is no different. We have chosen efficiency and global synchronization as our highest temporal virtues, and in doing so, we have built a reality of breathtaking connectivity that often leaves us feeling disconnected from the very moments we are trying to manage. The story of the City of Cycles is a mirror held up to our own frantic lives, asking us what we have sacrificed in the name of progress. Its ruins are a testament to the power of a simple, radical idea that time is not found in the stars but forged in the shared spaces between us. It challenges us to look at the invisible architecture of our own days, at the relentless stream of notifications and deadlines, and to ask what story our schedule is telling. Is it a narrative of anxiety and consumption, or one of connection and purpose? You are the author of your own chronology. Perhaps the most profound ritual you can reclaim is the simple, deliberate act of pausing, of turning away from the quantified hour to simply be present with another person, or even with yourself. In those unmeasured moments, you are not wasting time. You are building it just as they did. What small, meaningful rhythm will you reintroduce to your own life symphony? Let us know in the comments what modern rituals help you find your pace, and subscribe to join our next exploration into the shadows of history.